Well, hello and welcome to the Bible Truth Project channel. And my name is Matt Weaver, and I'm here with Roy Troyer. And we're going to talk about another one of these captivating themes biblical, what were we saying? Biblical economic systems. Biblical economic systems. There has been is it fair to say controversy in world history over which economic system is the best, which is the best for people and society and things of that nature. And it's one of
Yep.
these questions that society wrestles with even now is capitalism or free market better than the planned economies? Or is there something else that could be done that would even be better? And I guess we want to look at this in light of scripture and what the Bible teaches principle wise and I guess have a fun discussion talking about what biblical market is, or what market is the most biblical. My dyslexia coming out. Um, so anyway, Roy, you can give us your thoughts because I know you have great prepared statements. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Well, actually, I'll preface this by saying that I am not an economist.
Not either, but I
um,
understand money can be helpful.
yes,
I think we all
there is,
understand. Yeah.
yeah, and there is a distinct economy in the Bible that's probably different from anything that we experience today. Um, but is it realistic to think that we can realize that same thing today? I don't know. I think that on a personal level and even within God's body, I think a lot of what we see in Old Testament, under Israel in their sovereignty and while they were representing God's kingdom, I think that we see some of those principles at work, in literally probably in an economic sense and also probably in a spiritual sense. I think that a lot of it, what we see back then, is illustrative of what we see spiritually today, just because of, God operates in certain principles
What
and
does
in
that
certain
word mean?
ways.
What does illustrative mean?
It's
Illustrative of?
basically, yes, illustrative
Okay.
of.
That's a big word.
Yeah, $10 words this morning. Maybe too early for that, huh?
Sorry.
So, no, I mean, yeah. So nowadays we have, like you said, we have command markets, which is planned markets, I guess is another word for that that people use. You have people, or sometimes one person, deciding, basically organizing the whole economy. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have a free market, which, throughout the world, there's actually very few nations that fall in either category. And then, they came up with this next label, which is called a mixed economy. And we, here in the United States would definitely be a mixed economy, maybe leaning a little more towards the free market side. Um, and there's a lot to be said, I think, in the era that we live in, even just looking at it experientially, that capitalism works well in a nation that has, shall we say, a strong influence or a socialist element coming from, say, the church. So that's worked well here in the United States because of the religious element in our society. Because capitalism can be a bit of a cold machine, if you will. Um, but you layer in the element of charity and Christian love, and it can all work. Um, what we see in Israel probably more so would be what they categorize nowadays as a traditional economy, right? Um, so, more agrarian, and there were a lot of those at that time with surrounding nations. And yet, of course, the agrarian aspect of their economy wasn't probably what we want to focus on. It was more God created something unique even in what they had there, um, in the way that things operated. For example, agrarian and traditional economies, if I understand it correctly, were almost a little bit socialist or communist, except for the fact that they were ground roots, a little more organic, surrounding customs and traditions and faith and so on, versus a revolution and top down authority. And yet, in traditional economies, I guess, you had a community and they would grow crops, they would do whatever they do, and people were taken care of within the community, and the surplus would go to maybe some leader or elite or organization or something like that. Whereas in Israel, you didn't really have that. They were allowed to keep their own surplus, if I understand it correctly. Of course, they took off the top for the temple, their tithe, and so on. But they were allowed to prosper, and in that way, kind of had a little bit of a free market thing going on. There's a lot more to it than that, but I'll let you say your piece, I guess, for now.
Oh no, you were doing so well. Well, in short, I mean, some of this, I guess, is spurred on because there was a Facebook post the other day where a gentleman was basically kind of bringing out the fact that in we have a he doesn't live in our area, but he lives in a business rich area, lots of businesses, and he was just saying, like, is it not enough, like, that we make have all this productive um capacity, if you will, and we still have people who are in need and poverty, and do we create 501(c)(3)s to help that, yada yada yada? Is that the church? Is that whatever? And there was this kind of concept of, well, how do you deal with how do you deal with poverty per se in our I guess communities? And it's a fair
Mm-hmm.
question. And it's something like, if you look around the world, I've been to a ton of countries. I mean, it's probably under 30 countries, but it's yeah, probably something like that, probably 28, 29 countries. And just from my experiences, there's these varying, to varying degrees, there's different economic systems, but there's something that unites all economic systems, and that's human need.
Right.
Humans have needs. That's what drives economy. You need a house, which means you're going to need something to build that house out of, and that somebody's going to have to produce that and make that, and somebody's going to sell that. You're going to buy that, and then that money that's exchanged needs to be stored somewhere. And anyway, so all of these mechanisms that are required for industry are all basically um, are necessary for solving the problem of the basic need. So food, shelter, clothing being the big three that we think about as human need. And so how do we how do you produce, like, how do you produce an economy? Well, if you don't have everybody do everything necessary for life, not everybody needs to be doing everything. This guy can special one guy can specialize in clothes, one guy can specialize in shelter, another guy can specialize in food, and they can exchange goods and services and support each other. That way you can focus on one thing and be more productive and better at that than otherwise. And so that's the bedrock of economy in general, and it goes back as old as time immemorial. In the ancient days, they had open markets in the streets where your various vendors would come and they would exchange their wares, and they could exchange that for coin, they could exchange that for goods and services themselves, and it's as old as it goes. And one of the aspects of the difference between just market versus like free market is not a forced market. Back in the old days, there was a lot more slavery involved. And so, yes, there was a market, but not everybody was free. And so, free market, the basic operating principle is nobody is forced to do anything. They're doing it of their own free will. And that is what the basis of the American system is built off of. When we abolished slavery, we adopted a free market mentality, which means that every person of their own free will signs up for a job because obviously going hungry is no fun. So you, in your of your own free will, sign up to do something in exchange for something, and that's what free market really means. And so it's built on the baseline of a free market system works as long as people are willing to do something or be productive, in short. And that in and of itself is actually a biblical principle. In
Yeah.
Second Thessalonians, Paul is making a case for not being idle, and he's I don't know why, maybe they were lazy up there. I don't know. Because in verse chapter 3 verse or yeah chapter 3 verse 6 it says, but we command you, brothers and sisters, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, to keep away from any brother who lives an undisciplined life and not according to the tradition they received from us. And then he goes not just about discipline, but he actually goes into the two verses later, and we did not eat anyone's food without paying. Instead, in toil and drudgery, we worked night and day in order not to burden any of you. Not because we do not have that right, but we to ourselves as an example for you to imitate. For even when we were with you, we used to give you this command: if anyone is not willing to work, neither should he eat. There is this basic concept that if you're not willing to work, like, then you shouldn't be eating. Like, you need to be
Right.
productive. You need to be a productive individual. Now, of course, we all know there are physical disabilities that can happen, that can keep somebody from being physically productive. But in general, productivity has to do with using the gifts that you have for something. And
Right.
example after example in the Bible, even the talents, taking what you have, doing something with it, trying to produce something with it. The effort is what's there. And in the Bible, nowadays we have things called bankruptcy. When a person goes out and tries to be productive and fails, they can claim bankruptcy protection. It will keep them from losing everything. But yet their efforts to own operations or means of manufacturing in the future are going to be severely limited because their credit will definitely reflect that they once before did not manage well. And in the Bible, in those days, they had indentured servitude, which was for a period of time you could basically say, I have a debt I can't pay. I'm willing to work for you for X amount of years in exchange for you settling my debt, and they could indenture themselves that way. It wasn't indentured for life, like a lot of people think, oh, slavery, the Bible. It was basically glorified employment.
Except for the foreigners, of course.
Foreigners is different, but within Israel itself, it was basically almost like employment. You
Right.
sold yourself to another. Now you became their responsibility,
Hmm.
and you now worked to produce, and the other guy was responsible to try to settle your debt because you weren't able to. And you in exchange are going to give your effort to him. And there are times, unfortunately, even with employers, you have to, even nowadays, you have to sometimes have discussions about, hey, we need you to like step it up and be more productive. You're not bringing enough to the table for what we're paying you, things of that nature. So
Yeah.
that's where this kind of basic idea comes from. And it contrasts. So in short, you're going to have a market. You're going to have people producing goods and services. And in the modern day, the biggest thing, the biggest discussion over the last 100 years was really the idea of who should control that process. Should that be um, the free will, as the people who just decide to produce these goods and services, or should the government step in? Like, should there be a free market where people can choose to provide those goods and services and be responsible for them, or should it be a government agency which then decides? And it's famously called central planning.
Right.
So you go free market versus central planned or a planned economy. And it's a little bit what you're touching on. And we know the disastrous results of planned economies. They are
Right.
horribly inefficient. They also don't motivate people, because at the end of the day, you can work as hard as you want. You're not going to reap the benefits per se of your effort if you go above and beyond. So if everybody is given, the same tasks to do, you just do the minimum. Because what point would there be in exerting yourself extra when the minimum is sufficient?
And it doesn't
So,
stimulate creativity either, If you have one person planning everything, you're relying on that person's creativity and imagination to come up. They have obviously underlings that do some of that. But the good thing about free market is, people are rewarded for creativity and innovation. And it's for that reason that you see, some of the best products and services and ideas coming out of free markets is because people are able to
yep.
see some reward for, creativity. What you're talking about, even just going above and beyond, that's like on a basic level. We're not even getting into starting businesses and having ideas and growth and things of that nature. So there's that element too.
So in short, like one of the things, I guess, that I'm in the business world. I mean, I'm not a business owner per se, but I manage companies or help manage companies. And in short, we're a business family. My dad started many businesses, and us kids help run these businesses basically. So I grew up in business. I grew up in industry, trying to produce things, trying to be manufacturers, and that, I guess, makes us that dangerous 1% that controls the means of production to the market, to the Marxists out there. Um, but in short, there's challenges with being the guy that has to produce has to decide how to manufacture the goods, because you actually have to be very smart, and you have to be very, like, you have to be able to, when I say smart, you have to understand customer needs, customer wants, wishes, be able to facilitate that, lead people, get people to do the necessary things in order for you to produce these products. So that means ordering materials, that means um, organizing labor, that means understanding laws, rules, regulations in doing these business transactions, contracts to, yeah, going all down the line of things of producing. And it isn't easy. And I know that there is, in America, there's this thing called the corporation. The corporation is basically a cooperation of people who fall under a little bit of a different organizational hierarchy. A corporation is allowed in a certain circumstances. Basically, it's forced to, or you are forced to organize it a particular way when you're a corporation versus a LLC or something like that. And but the unique thing about the corporate structure is that there is some benefits, because you have more people managing involved in the decision making, legally speaking, in a corporation. And that actually benefits the corporation, because there are then advantages given by the government to corporations for, say, over small member owned entities. Um, for instance, taxation. The corporate rate is lower than personal. So if you're a personal entity at a certain size, you're paying more taxes on your income, business income, than you are if you're a corporation. Now, if you pull that money out for personal income, you will get taxed, but corporation isn't. But one of the unique things in general, though, with corporations, you see these, groups of people producing amazing products. And in America, corporations rule. Like, they're the big kids on the block. They have the most buying power. They have the most, the smartest people, the best talent. I mean, just go down the line: Amazon, Walmart,
Right.
all of the food companies, and big pharma and big ag, like, huge companies. And and it's, yeah, I mean, people like to throw corporations in the dirt and say, oh, well, these people are all about money. Well, who isn't? Like,
Yeah.
let's just be frank. In a free market, everything is about money. It isn't about it is about maximizing the profit that you can, but it isn't necessarily about cheating. Now, there are people that cheat, but that's why we have a justice system. But if you
Right.
look at but if you look at the alternative in a planned economy, the challenges was the planner could also be highly corrupt and be a very poor manager. And now you have all kinds of shortages. And um, I went through a great course on economics just because I wanted to understand a little bit what happens in economics um, discussions, I guess. And it was really fascinating to learn the difference between a free market and a planned economy. And in a planned economy, for instance, in Soviet Russia, they actually had a lot of cash, but they didn't have anything to buy.
Yeah. No value.
Well, they had money. They didn't have
Right.
goods and they didn't have services.
If you don't have goods and services, you have massive inflation, basically.
Well, you can have inflation, but you won't have inflation in a planned economy because it's not free market. The price is the price set by
I
the central
guess.
planner. So you'll have cash, but you can't buy anything.
I
So
guess.
you're held hostage. In a free market, yes, inflation would happen because the value of the goods would increase and you'd want it. Now, what happened in those economies, a black market formed, which is a free
Hmm.
economy.
Right.
And suddenly, you were able to get, if you were in a position of power, which supposedly isn't supposed to happen, to their Marxist ideals, there shouldn't be any like general hierarchy that is overreaching. Yet, essentially, the same thing happened. So the people in charge had access to the best resources, and that was the reward for being in charge. And it ends up being really no better than a free market system. But how
Yeah,
do
it's
we?
that's what they blame the corporations for being. It's just human nature. And the best case scenario is to create competition between people who are greedy or whatever. If you have one person with a nature like everyone else, it's obvious what's going to happen. There's corruption. I guess it's not just one person. And the thing, in a free market economy, the thing we're facing now is we get to the point, and we're not a free market, I get it, but we get to the point where our corporations are so big, and I have no problem with corporations and capitalism and people making money. But the problem we're seeing now is we're getting to the point where corporations have so much power that they are getting in bed with the government and creating this crony capitalist situation in some cases. Lobbyists and things like that, pulling strings for regulations that benefit them and crush their competition. And if that goes on for too long, all of a sudden you end up with a socialist type of economy, and you're just back to square one, I guess.
What's square one?
Well, I guess we didn't start off as a socialist country, but I'm saying you end up making that whole turnaround 180 degrees and becoming what you're ostensibly not.
So I'm curious, like from your perspective, Roy. So, you've owned business and you've worked for people. You've done both, so you understand I guess, the nuance in that. And there's probably benefits and value to both kind of circumstances. But from your perspective, obviously you're a Christian, you're a believer,
Hmm.
and you're a good believer in the free market system. For people out there that struggle with thinking that businesses just hoard things and hoard opportunity and aren't fair, and that it's just not fair that they have all these resources, that we should tax them, we should take those resources from them and give out, like what is the right way, to fill the needs of the population, when you're looking at a scenario where you have businesses who have resources more than people who don't have businesses and have needs.
Well, I mean, those businesses aren't hoarding their resources necessarily. The opportunities they see cause them to invest. and that grows the economy. It's, what people might call trickle down economics. Um, and, that's been smeared and besmirched quite a bit, but it, to some degree, very much does work that way. And as a person who currently is employed by, you know, your company, I work for Matt Weaver and their family. I've been employed, like you said, I've been employed and I've been self-employed. Yeah,
Be
big secret.
objective.
But look, I'm an employee right now, and I have no antagonistic viewpoint when I see Weaver Barnes, which is who I work for, prosper. To me, that's a very good thing. That's job security, that's potential room for growth, that's, you know, in general, and especially, there's a difference too, knowing that I work for Christian people who um, will do right by their employees. There is a difference in that. And whereas, of course, the free market also takes care of that in situations where you don't necessarily have the most ethical employers. They might string you out as far as they can and get the most out of you, but eventually competition will catch up with them, and they will have to either do right by you or you can find another opportunity. And that, of course, is not necessarily the case when you see an economic downturn. But during those times, everybody is obviously tightening their belt, and it's not just employees. I know that, yeah, there's corporations that they just kind of ruthlessly purge their, you know, their numbers and so on, which is, like I said earlier, capitalism can be a bit of a cold machine without a whole lot of compassion or feelings, unless, of course, you have people of faith who are running them. But at the end of the day, the free market still corrects most or all of that. Not saying that, the government doesn't have a role. They have played roles here and there in our economy, and I most of the time probably not to our advantage. But no, I don't, as an employee, I don't see corporations as big, bad, and evil necessarily, unless you're starting to see a crony capitalist situation. I think that the more corporations grow, as long as there's healthy competition, and there are laws in place to prevent monopolies. I know that some of that doesn't necessarily always kick into gear because of cronyism, as I mentioned earlier. But as long as that is in place, and you know, for the most part, the free market is going to take care of it all, and you're going to reap the benefits of it even as an employee. We're a very prosperous nation. Most places are not going to be able to go and get a job and make the kind of money that we do, even though we're in a free market for the most part. We're mixed, but we're mostly a free market. Well, I guess we're heavily regulated, but we lean towards the free market side. But I guess, the short answer is I don't see it as a threat to the small guy. I just don't.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, there's obviously, yeah, we are regulated, but our regulations tend to actually come down to um, employee rights, certain types of, protections we have to deal with when dealing with employees. As far as what you can do, there's some regulations when it comes to the potential harm it can do for like the environment or things of that nature. But I mean, there's some stuff that's maybe ridiculous. Cities requiring you to register, every city, that you're wanting to do business in need to register,
Right.
things of that nature. That's just burdensome. So it's not fully free, but there's a reason for it, I guess. But in short, yeah, crony capitalism. There was a book I read some years ago by Bill Clinton's oh, what was his position in his cabinet? He was fairly high up, but he actually wrote a book on crony capitalism, and it was kind of eye-opening to actually hear how much effect, at least in America, that cronyism has. And cronyism is essentially, the good boys club down in DC, mixture between politicians and corporate elites and lobbies who are basically trying to get their agendas, um, to that favor their industries to get to the floor, and to have favorable rulings from the government to support them versus their competitors. And I guess one of the examples of cronyism in an ironic sense is actually the federal, I think it was the federal ban, I might be wrong, but the federal ban on hemp production. There were people, originally marijuana, it wasn't marijuana, but it was for hemp production that they had a ban. And there was, I forget the whole story. Actually, I'd seen it on Rogan talking about it a long time ago. And just for the record, I don't listen to a lot of Rogan. There's a couple episodes that I've listened to, but he happened to mention it on one where the ban on was really hemp, and it had to do with rope production. There was somebody
Hmm.
connected to a senator, and he had interest in that, to be shut down for his own benefit, and he was able to get it passed. And now you have this law that has nothing to do with drugs, basically criminalizing people. Its root was not actually drugs; it was actually crony capitalism.
Right.
If and that's the stuff that is miserable. That the average person, like even us, we don't have huge companies. We don't have the ability to influence government like a huge corporation. Like, let's say, for instance, the biggest employer in our area goes to the local representative. They're going to have a lot more sway on how that person is going to feel about particular legislation than what we will. We're not going to have the natural ability to go to our legal representatives and say, "Listen, you need to do it this way or that way. This is how it affects us." There has been times where local representation is called my dad, not our dad, my dad, and asked opinions on things, but very seldom, very seldom. But that's still, we're just subject, like an example of something that was really difficult for us this last year. The local road was shut down during the busiest time for tourists in our region. And one of the businesses is a retail store, and retail traffic obviously is necessary. And they literally shut the road down to basically increase access to a refuse company in our area. And it was going to be for a period of, I think, 4 or 5 weeks, something like that. And we tried to like delay it, push it out. It just didn't matter. The government made a decision, and they could care less about how we fared during that event. Now, had we been a big company, that might have affected that, you know,
Right.
and
As it did
that's
for the refuse company that you're talking about.
and that's what crony capitalism is. When you have unfair advantages given to companies because they have connections.
Right.
Um, but in short, when we're looking at biblical systems, because people are probably bored to tears now, we're talking about all these different economies. The from a biblical standpoint, the thing I guess I want to explore a little bit and discuss is like, I think there's a sentiment that, I guess for some people at least, that somehow what they have is never enough, and that there just should always be more, and that it's the companies holding back, and somehow hoarding things, that they have more. If you listen to um our favorite man from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, companies are always making too much money. It doesn't matter
Right.
if they had a down year and up year, it's always too much. Like, companies should not make more money. Drug prices are too high. They're just too high, and things of
And
that
they are
nature.
because of crony capitalism. But anyway.
Yeah. But in short, there is real need out there. There's people in our area, and there's employees that we have, and we only have so many resources as a business. You have to protect aspects of the business, not even just from the employee standpoint, but one of the people we're beholden to is banks. Banks need to see certain factors in your economic statements that show them that you're a healthy company. And so you are actually trying to run a company in a certain way because, if you have loans and things of that nature, which most businesses do, or lines of credit and things of that nature, you have to actually have sound economic fundamentals. And so there, a lot of people, the perception is that, there's excess. And it's generally in my all the years that I've seen businesses happen, there's been very few years where there's a lot of excess. There's always growth opportunity. There's things of that nature. And then the big one is tax liability. You have to take a lot of what you win and just give it to the government. And
Yep.
one of the things that's what people don't understand is the percentage rate on taxation. It was Milton Friedman. I was actually reading his book recently, Free to Choose. And he basically says an owner is entitled to every percent that he owns, he's entitled to that percentage of the profit of the company. That's what ownership is. And taxation is actually forced government ownership of the entity because it legally demands a certain percentage of that company's profit to go to the government. So
Yep.
whatever the tax rate is, that's what the government is saying it controls that portion or it owns that portion of the business, if you will. And the booger of it is that if we have those funds as a business conglomerate, we can reinvest that into the business infrastructure and produce opportunities for people. Or the government takes it, and what does the government do with that money?
Right.
Does
We're
it
seeing
produce?
recently what they do with
Do,
it.
do they produce opportunities? I mean, generally they do infrastructure, they do protection, they do safety and defense. But in short, they are forcing in our system, they're forcing themselves upon as a liability to companies, forcing them to pay X amount in taxation. Uh,
Right.
and that's just on top. And so that's just on top of everything else. So, it's a bummer. I wish people would just understand how difficult business really is. Like business is not easy. It's very difficult. It is easier once it's established and you have good people, but companies, it is, you're constantly reacting to everything around you. I think it's Warren Buffett who famously said that, back in the days of the lords and the city states, people would fight over lands. Nowadays, those are just called mergers and acquisitions. You're fighting over market territory and things of that nature, and it is warfare, really.
Right.
Marketing is how to win the battle, how to get in front of a customer and win their attention and get them to buy your products. And so yeah, it's a really neat situation. So in some ways, it's like, is that biblical? Well, in short, the biblical system was really more of inheritance based.
Hmm.
You didn't have the buying and selling of personal property at will. Every family was allotted a portion. It's actually very similar to the way the natives. I have a sister-in-law who's a Navajo, and the way the tribes operate the land. There's like a family plot allotted to a family within the territory, and it's kind of unique because it's actually the way the Bible states it. Every family had a plot, and that was theirs to sustain themselves. They now have to go and plant, and they have to do the right things and repair the fences and keep the animals out and cultivate and take care of their stuff. And if they do that well, they'll be blessed. They'll have what they need. They'll have the resources they need to survive. And then if you have, because you are smart and well and blessed and all that, and you have resources, there are people back in those days who had misfortune who would indenture themselves. And so you could buy their property and you could buy their loyalty, if you will, and you could grow bigger. But at some point, it would go back. In the
Right.
Jubilee, ultimately,
Jubilee years.
everything goes back. Original titles, everything goes back, so that everybody has a chance. And in our economic system, that's something that a lot of people um, are trying to push for is equality, not an outcome, but a quality of opportunity, and so that everybody has an equal chance to at least get started. Um, and which I think is probably fair. It's unfair. Like, what does starting means? Well, everybody has an opportunity to get a job. that pays enough to just to live. And then from there, how can we grow? How can we, become more productive as individuals and things of that nature? And by and large, in good, I would say corporations to a large part have made that possible, probably more possible than small business. Because back in the day when everything was just small business, um, the standard of living per se, like it's changed. Like if you go back to the 60s and say that was the standard of living, well, the houses were small, and lifestyles were different than they are today. Everybody wants to travel and do fancy things and eat out all the time, and they have access to things they didn't have in the 60s. So standard of living goes up exponentially over time because of the advances we make in productivity. But at the same time, um, yeah, there's just pros and cons. But in short, like everybody, a perfect scenario, biblical scenario, is that people have to take responsibility and be productive, and they have to be productive people. They have to
Right.
not be soaking on others. I mean, misfortune happens, and everybody knows that, and churches are very willing to help people. But there was even in the Bible that you don't really hand out things. You allowed people to glean from the corners of the field for the poor. They were allowed to go out and to glean some products off of the corners of your field. The law required that. That was the way you took care of the poor and needy, but they had to go do it.
Right.
There
And it
was
was
no
also at the
handing.
discretion of the owner how much of that corner to leave. There was some generosity discretion there too.
Sure. Well, and we sit hear the story of, Boaz, Ruth, the whole thing. He sees the plight and is, sympathetic towards it and ultimately redeems her and gets her out of the situation. But that's how those people survive. There is that. There is the
Hmm.
ability for people, but people had to do it.
Right.
It is, I don't know where the idea comes from that you can just be a non-productive human and thrive. Like
Right.
education, number one, for economies to work is people need to be productive.
Right. Absolutely.
So, um, that was actually my response to it is that to the statement originally when I was interacting with this individual a little bit was financial education and people need to learn how markets work. People need to learn how jobs, like how money is made, and it's all based on productivity. And then they need to go and find something and be productive at it. Like that's how you're going to have resources. If you just sit back and say, I have no opportunities, well, there's opportunities everywhere. They require effort and they require education. You have to figure out how to do things and then move on them. And and
Right.
and generally speaking, in our economy, if you're a hard worker, you're going to find a job and you're going to get paid
Yep.
well and you're going to do good.
Yep. Yeah, it's true. Um, yeah, I agree. The biblical economy, yeah, it's definitely interesting. What do you think about the? I know that you generally steer more towards the literal interpretation of the Bible, but I find it interesting how it's still many of the things in the Old Testament can be kind of allegorized a little bit into the spiritual part of our current life. Um, what are your thoughts on that? Is there any relevance to
You have
their
an
economy?
example?
Like I said, you can't necessarily take their economy and apply it to an economy of today because in order to do that, you would almost need a theocracy. And a theocracy is just not a good idea unless Jesus is personally in charge of it.
And it has
Um,
never worked up to this point.
right, even Israel's theocracy, because of their flawed human nature, eventually, had its own problems.
Mhm.
Um, but you still had this economy working for them because of it being a theocracy. You almost have to have that in place for it to work. But no, all I'm saying, I guess, is, we as Christians, we in the family of God, we see the same, similar principles at play. We see an inheritance that we I don't know. Some people would say that we have it now. Some people would say that we gain it later. Either way, there's a picture of an inheritance. Um, and then you have this battle that first generation kind of has to fight, to hold that inheritance, obviously with the Lord's help and blessing. And then you have to work. We have this whole idea against works in the Christian faith. And yet, we have to work what we've been given, not necessarily working for what the Lord is going to give us, but just working the ground, kind of, I guess. And of course, Deuteronomy 8:17 through 18 makes it clear that, God gives Israel the power to get wealth. And they have the harvest and the Jubilee, and all of it operates by principles of faith because, you can't, God has them taking sabbatical years every 7 years, and they can't charge interest to their brother and all of that. And basically, the whole economy comes crashing down without the element of faith, right?
I mean, yes. I mean, so in short, like for instance, before there was welfare systems in the US economy, churches were they were like people of faith, and churches were what brought the disadvantaged, the downtrodden, those people their resources basically, because you see that you are there to help your fellow human. But what happens? But yeah, in short, Israel, it would be hard to pull that off, like you said, without a theocracy. Sure, and I'm not advocating that we go to a theocracy without Jesus being here. When Jesus is here, he will do a theocracy, and then it is what
Right.
it is. But then the vegetation will grow like crazy, and we probably won't have to be spending our times working as much. But um, as a whole, I guess, I guess the ultimate question, like the struggle for us, we're a second generation. My dad, the struggle was real. Did not grow up in money. He did not start with anything, and started what he did and worked through all those years of effort and sweat. Now we've been at it. We've been working in the businesses over 20 years. Um, and we're trying to take them to the next level for our generations. And it's not just for our generations, it's for the people around us, like but all success, real success, when you look at Proverbs, real success comes through toil and struggle. Um, because true wealth is a long term, like actual wealth is a long term gain. It's not a short term. There are get rich quick. There are instances where people strike it right and, step onto something that's unbelievable. But, the amount of people you actually know that are in that sort of thing is very few. And the other thing is, um, how would you say it? So, like people, um, there's ill-gotten gain. There's people that are dishonest, who cheat, who lie, who basically don't do things in within the regulations. For instance, tax cheating and things of that nature, or whatever it may
Mhm.
be. Who have an advantage in the short term, but the long term it doesn't work out because there's a principle that's violated, and for whatever reason, it just building true wealth takes time. Just takes time.
Right.
It's not get rich quick. It takes time. And that's the biblical example. You don't get rich quick in the Bible. It's just when you are living a good life, a clean life, a a valued principled life, things will be added to you.
Right.
As like the Bible says that seek the kingdom of God and all these things will be added to you. And it also talks about the promises that if you believe, you will inherit in this age houses, lands, and things of that nature. And people will say, oh, prosperity gospel. Well, all I can tell you is that
With
nobody is
persecutions.
well, yeah, but nobody is preaching, really nobody out there ever is preaching a gospel of poverty. Like that's not a blessing. Nobody is blessed by extreme poverty. Even God is not blessed to see extreme poverty. It is a result of the lack of production. where people aren't organized and set up and doing community well. And so it does happen where poverty is real. You know, I didn't grow up in money. My parents didn't have a lot of money when I was a kid. It as the businesses
Right.
grew and things, our resources increased over time. But in short, it wasn't it's just not, if people would just understand, it takes a lot of years. It's a slow crawl, and eventually all of a sudden now there's resources. And so now it's not about it's like our us as the second generation. Our challenge is, you know, it took blood, sweat, and tears to get to get what we have built for 30 plus years. And now, I mean, we're 20 years into it, but not that we were running them for 20 years, but still, like, it's my brother's probably been running for 21 years, I believe, been the GM at one of the companies. But in short, you know, we have to take the resources and slowly extend that. My dad has always taught us is, in general, the basic principle in life is to try to take one and turn it into two. You know, if you have whatever you have in your hand, try to multiply it. How do you
Right.
take what you have and make it multiply?
Right.
If you have, you know, what's an example? If you have whatever you're doing, how do you do one more of that, or whatever? And then once that's figured out, then you do double of that, and you just try to work in intervals like that. So you take what you have and you try to double it. And that's actually a biblical principle, with the talents. The guy who
Right.
took what he had and buried it and did nothing with it was considered to be an unprofitable servant. We could use the term unproductive because he didn't do anything with it.
Right.
And in short, God wants us to do things with the things we have. Try to make it grow. And because when we grow what we have, we actually benefit and bless everybody around us. You know, by our companies growing and being financially healthy and successful, that gives opportunities to all the families. Like, it kind of struck me, was it last year when we took the whole company out to Sight and Sound? You know,
Yeah.
we had
Last
like
Christmas.
the one company, we had four, like just with our one company, we had 4 bus loads of people when you figure all the kids and wives and everything else in there. And as you see this convoy going down the road, it hit me like a ton of bricks, like the responsibility of decision making. All of these people are depending on our ideas to work, to provide for their families, for their needs, for their shelter, for their food, the clothing, and everything, like for their survival. Like, they're actually relying on your decision making. And all of a sudden, the way, I mean, I obviously feel the weight before, but it just was like, oh my goodness, like, what have we got ourselves into? You know, people don't see that side of it. When
Right.
you're a decision maker, you carry the weight of people's livelihoods. And it's, you know, it's not about, like in our case, it's about being responsible with the duty we have
Right.
and taking with what we have been given from our parents and doing right by it. And the responsibility is, you know, look, it's not just personal gain. It's not like I'm just working for personal gain with our responsibility. I mean, it's different because obviously it's family companies, but, um, you know, we're there to provide find products and connect people to that, but we're basically allowing people to survive. And there's a blessing in that. There's a fulfillment, I should say, in that. Um,
Sure.
that I think is also, you know, is biblical. But
Hmm.
anyway, I don't know. We have to go further. It's been it's a fun conversation to have to, I guess, talk about economies and money and how things work. And I guess some of our experiences. I mean, I know even with our employees, there's a lot of people that don't understand business. They don't understand the finance world. They don't understand the mechanisms. They
Right.
see all this product flowing through the shop, and there's an assumption that there's just an insane amount of money being made off all this product. And somehow it never occurs to them that you've got to pay for buildings and pay for trucks and for tools and for employees and for insurances. And I mean, by the time you have everybody paid, there's not that much left over. It's kind of how it works in
Percentage
business,
wise, right?
percentage wise. Yeah, there's always because everybody wants a piece of pie.
Yep,
And and that's how the economy works. Everybody needs to have their piece and portion, and if you can do that well and manage well, then you'll have a successful operation. So, but in short, I guess I want to get this one point across, and that is think about like if you want to impress your employer, let's put it this way. If you are an employer, I can guarantee you the one thing that impresses you is employees that see needs and things that have to be taken care of, and they do it, and they do it without even asking, and they take responsibility. But the number one thing that an economy will reward you for is taking responsibility.
I'm
It's
taking notes here.
Yeah, it's the number one thing that you will be rewarded for in business is taking responsibility. It's why a CEO gets paid what a CEO gets paid, because the responsibility, the buck stops with him or her. Whoever sits in that position has to make decisions that affect potentially, whatever, hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of people. And in most cases, they're decisions that are lose lose. Somebody's going to lose in that decision, and you have to make it because the market changes and people's demands change and how you produce things change, and it requires you to change the organization. And you have to now make a decision that's going to be unpopular, that people aren't going to like.
Right,
And that's just how it works. And the stress of that all is why, okay, being able to pull that off and be responsible for it and make it all work, you're going to get the reward for it. Um, a high level manager, what do? Managers essentially manage situations. They take care of stuff as stuff comes up. That's why they're called managers. They're trying to manage problems. As problems come up, they're now responsible to deal with those problems. So if they take responsibility and fix problems versus just passing it off to their direct report or superior, that employee will become more valuable because they actually can fix things and tend to not cause stress. So I talked to a local, probably the biggest employer in our area, some years ago, and I just said the one thing I would tell young people if they could understand that their career, that you in an economy, you are directly rewarded to the proportion of responsibility you're willing to take. And I mean, it's not just that, but in short, it is like when you are crazy enough to take on jobs that are probably over your head and you are to fulfill your promises and follow through with it and solve those problems, you're going to be the 1%. Let's put it that way, because you are above average. Most people can't do it all, and thus they do a portion of that. They'll take a portion of the load. Um, but yeah, in short, that is, I guess, my thoughts on the matter. Be productive. I'm not saying you have to, there are limits to what people can do, but in short, my dad always looked for a person, and obviously there's a lot of different personalities, but he always looked for a person who could see into what the job was at hand and could see into it and could participate in that without asking too many questions. Um, those were for him the key people. Those were for him the highest paid. Those were for him the ones that caught that because they didn't require effort to direct them. They saw into it and they took it, and it was like
it takes stress off his plate, right?
absolutely.
Yeah,
So and I'm not saying everybody's going to be that way, but that is what when you're trying to be out there fulfilling promises and doing things for people, it's the thing that moves the needle. Now you can't have
right.
all of those types. You need people that are thorough and all that stuff in businesses too. But generally speaking, your managers are going to be problem solvers. They're going to take responsibility and they're going to figure it out and make the problem go away.
Yep,
Nope.
that's the value
Okay.
you bring, basically. So, yep,
Yeah, those are biblical principles too. So, but in
yep.
short, that's I guess what I have. So, anything else, Mr. Roy?
I think we're good for
Fun
our armchair
discussion.
economic discussion.
economics, work, productivity, money, you know, yeehaw. All right. Have a good one.